Hi everyone, this is Tim. Welcome to North and South Podcasts. And Claire Berry, the legend, is back on. Claire did an excellent podcast with me on ADHD and Neurodiversity several months ago. Please check that episode out. I think it's 29. But she's back on to talk about that, but also about the comedy circuit. So great to have Claire back. I'll allow Claire to talk in a minute about Femme de la Femme. I've also got legend Matt Jones, who is on the comedy circuit like Claire, and he does a podcast called So Yous Do Comedy, USE. It's a bit of a Scouse thing. And he also does an open mic night in the Liverpool area called Up for the Crack. Crack, C-R-A-I-C, is in the Irish, having a good time. So, folks, we're going to talk about comedy and mental health and just have a general chat. But I actually went to uni with Matt long ago, and it's so great to get back in touch with him recently through Claire, through Facebook. He came up on a link. So, great to be reacquainted with Matt. But, Claire, how are you doing, first of all? And how's Femme de la Femme?
Yeah, like I'm still buzzing from our gig on Thursday. It's just, I don't know, like it's amazing. There seems to be such a kind of buzz. We sold out like the first one at the Everyman, we sold out a week before. Then the next one we sold out like 11 days before. And our next gig is actually on the 24th of November, and we've only got 17 tickets left.
Wow, that's really good. So that
So
night's really,
it's
really
just crazy.
hit
Yeah.
the ground running
Yeah.
because I know at first there's always a lot of like, oh, will people want to come, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. But it just seems to be going from strength to strength. And we'll talk about Femme de la Femme later. So, Matt, So Yous Do Comedy is a comedy podcast on YouTube. How's that going for you?
Yeah, so me and Jack Miller, who's sort of my compatriot in the comedy world, we joined forces and thought, yeah, we'll set up a podcast. We had no real direction with it, just to have a chat with other comedians, local comedy circuit, open mic guys, people progressing into paid work. And yeah, we just wanted to get on there, see what happened, and have a laugh with a few comics. We've done our first three, and we've had on about, I think, 7 or 8 guests so far. And then we're going to start it up again. That was just our like trial period, and then we're going to move into, hopefully, I can probably say it, like the hot water studios when they're up and running, and then we'll probably do them every couple of weeks after that.
Every couple of weeks, that'll be brilliant because you are in a proper studio with proper sound for the first three. So you're hoping to move to another premises and go every 2 weeks instead of every month. Is that the plan now moving forward?
Yeah, well, Hot Water Comedy Club, currently up by Hope Street, they're moving premises, and they're going to have an all inclusive. It's going to be the biggest comedy club in the world. And they're going to have nightclub. They're going to have podcast studios, live podcast studios, so we can do them in front of an audience. So it's, yeah, really exciting what they've got planned. So we want to be part of that, and get So Yous Do Comedy up and running on their site.
Excellent. And I hope that goes from strength to strength. I've really enjoyed watching them first three. And I also like the way you speak to, you're speaking to genuine comics about genuine issues. It's not like, oh, let's put a nice PR thing together. I think that's been really, really good about it. It's very honest, and you're up for a laugh, and I've really enjoyed
Yeah,
it. So we'll put the links to
I
that
mean,
in the podcast notes as well.
yeah, and I mean, some of the because we've had Claire on the podcast, and we had one about women in comedy, and the sort of problems that they face, and we had Melina on, Claire, and the two girls from Rill, Nia and Sarah, who were brilliant. So yeah, no, we covered quite a lot of topics on there.
Yeah, it's been really good. And the open mic night you do Up for the Crack, you're also on the comedy circuit. We'll share your nights with people as well. How's that going?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, it's a little Irish pub in Liverpool. You probably know it, Shennanigan's Irish pub on Ty Barnes Street,
Yeah.
and it was weird the way that kicked off. I When I first started doing the comedy, you struggle to get gigs. You don't quite know where to go, and I originally jumped on as a comedian on the open mic music night, completely shocked the audience by just doing comedy instead of music. No one knew what was going on. It was absolute chaos, and it probably one of the worst gigs I've ever done in my life. And the manager of Shennanigans came up to me and went, "Oh, this is a brilliant idea." I thought he was going to say, "Oh, can you swear on here or not?" No.
Yeah, I'll edit you out, but you can swear if you want. Go on, try and do it more diplomatically.
Well, I'll say I thought he was going to say, "Oh, this was absolutely awful," and he actually really liked it, and then offered me to set up my own night upstairs once a month, and we've been doing that for the past 9 months. So we're having a big comics Christmas party in there in December, and it's just gone from strength to strength, and all the students love it. It's a free night. And yeah, we're going to start introducing where they can buy. You can have it for a tenner, the comedy night, a burger, a pint, and a little shot of baby Guinness, and or just turn up for free. So the pub have really bought into it, and the students love it.
Well, that's a really good offer because it's about £15 for a pint of Guinness at the minute. So
Yeah,
that's quite a.
no.
But yeah, hopefully that goes from strength to strength, mate. Now, I knew you were funny back in 1997 or whenever it was when you told me probably the funniest joke because we went to uni together for a bit. We were in different years, but I knew you quite well. And we had a little corner of our students' union called Scouts Corner. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I mean, just before the podcast was on, just for anyone listening, we were talking about Scouts Corner, and in our student union, there was nothing to do in Stoke. It was Staffordshire University, so every student just piled into the union on a Wednesday, and the night was called Shag, wasn't it?
Yeah. As in the
Um,
bird, you know, the bird, the shag bird.
yeah, that's it. No, I think it stood for something like straight, homosexual, and gay night or something, wasn't it?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it stood for something. It was sort of like an all-inclusive night for everyone, and whoever came up with the idea just decided to call it Shag Night.
Yeah.
And you go on a Wednesday, it'd be the sports day. Every sports team, the hockey team, tennis team, because I used to play tennis, well, I still do, and the football teams, rugby teams, everyone would pile in there. And then there was this tiny little corner right by the pool tables and by the food bit. And if you were ever lost, everyone would just pile over to Scouse Corner, and that would be like your little meeting point, as if you were a 4-year-old lost in the supermarket, you know.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. And I think, to be honest with you, when we'd had a few beers, we all kind of knew. I went with a few friends from sixth form, and there was just quite a few Scousers, plus our associates, who always went to Scouse Corner, as it became known. And I went back there in 2015. They've now like closed off that area, so that like sacred, hallowed site, which I'm sure in thousands of years will be a site of pilgrimage, it's now been closed to the public. So you know, terrible times. But I knew you were funny then, Matt, and we had a great time at uni. And you know, to become
What?
reacquainted because you put a comment in Claire Berry's Facebook. On Claire Berry's Facebook page when I'd done the podcast where I went, is that Matt Jones? Because it looked like yeah, and there you were. But this, you know, when we left uni, there was no like social media or phones weren't really a big thing yet, and you kind of lost contact with people. So it's a real pleasure to be reacquainted with your good self again.
And you, mate.
Right, Claire, going back to you. We spoke about ADHD. I'm still awaiting for like proper investigation into it because there's quite long waiting times at the
Yeah,
moment. How's it
yeah.
going for you at the moment in relation to your ADHD?
Well, I ended up kind of, I started some meds and I don't know, I got a bit, I don't know, didn't get on with them so well. And then I tried some other ones. And and then in all honesty, like because of kind of like CPTSD, PTSD as well, I'm on a lot of medication and just started a new kind of antidepressant. And I'm not sure if that it's something I wanted to kind of research really, whether that is sometimes used for ADHD. I've wondered. So for now, I'm just like, I can't. I've had quite a strong reaction to this new antidepressant, so it's like I just don't want to take anything else. And you know, a good response to it, as well as some side effects. I'm just kind of like, in terms of medication, I'm just sort of leaving it for now, and perhaps in the future,
See how it
sort of
goes.
look at it again. Yeah. So
I mean, I'm not on ADHD medication, but there are a lot of comorbidities that go with ADHD, like neuroses, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and things like that can be associated with ADHD. But also the way that we often respond to other things in our life because of the ADHD can make comorbidities more likely. So you're waiting months sometimes for these things to work, and then you go, right, is it this, is it that? And it's a very long and winding road, isn't it? But hopefully those new antidepressants will settle down and you can gauge things. But I think ADHD medication, it's very much a case of cost benefit analysis, and I forget there's a word for it, isn't it, that they use for like to reach the equilibrium. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a lot of like titration. That's the one.
That's it. Yeah, it's a good word.
There can often be a long time before you get this supposed balance right, and I wish you the best of luck with that. But it's just so hard, isn't it, to know exactly what's what and which is which, and it can be a long and painful road.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the antidepressants can take months to work for people who maybe aren't okay with them. Sometimes it can take like 15, 16 weeks to work, and that can be quite difficult waiting for those kind of things to kick in. Do you feel like that's helped you with the ADHD as well as the comorbidities that come with ADHD?
I guess it feels a little bit like it's helping with my focus as well, even though, I still I was trying to do something yesterday. I had I think in terms of my ADHD, I struggle more with like when I've got lots of little jobs to do, like my brain just gets so distracted. And I find myself sometimes going, Claire, just focus. Like trying to kind of like keep on track with little jobs. But I think, because obviously it all sort of feeds in with anxiety and depression. So I guess if the depression's better, I'm a bit more clearer headed. Do you know what I mean? But I had a really bad patch a couple of months ago in terms of my mental health, and I nearly jacked in femme de la femme. I just thought, oh God, I just can't do this. Like, we hadn't actually started the gig, and I'm so glad I've ridden it out and feeling more level, because it's just giving me such a sort of purpose at the moment, and I just feel so passionate about it. So it's just been, it's really exciting journey.
That's great stuff. Well, I think you do doubt yourself a lot, and there's another aspect of ADHD which is like there's a special name for it, but we don't always like criticism and feeling that we're not good at things, and that's something I've certainly noticed. But I think like the ADHD brain, if I go into a room where there's lots to do, I have to literally start in a corner and move around in a circle as a coping mechanism. And I thought I was weird for years, and it was only listening to the ADHD Adults UK podcast with those two fellas who mentioned that there's quite a lot of ADHD on the comedy circuit, which we'll get to later, that I thought, that's me. I do that. And I just thought there was something wrong with me. And I think a lot of people who know me probably go, yeah, it kind of makes sense. You have an ADHD, but sometimes things are hidden in plain sight and you just don't always acknowledge them. I think when you were last on, we spoke about going on holiday. I went to Scotland with my lad for 4 days, and the stress that going away causes me. I always persevere, but sometimes I feel like it'd be so much easier not to go anywhere because you get so frustrated and you forget things, and it just you go into panic mode.
Really
the
amount
difficult.
of sort of lists and things I have to write down to the minutiae. Do you know what I mean? And I still forget things, and it's still like
Tim,
yeah.
I was just going to ask, just from my perspective, I'm just listening. I've got no knowledge of anything ADHD, but it's interesting to listen to, and I'm just thinking, what's the difference between ADHD and say like obsessive compulsive behavior? Because it sounds like you're talking about, making lists and attention to detail, and you need to do stuff in a particular order. I mean, because you see people with, and I don't want to talk about anything that I've got no knowledge of anything, so I'm just talking generally. But when people are autistic or they'll do stuff and they like routines and lists, and how does it all fit into each other? Because when you talk about it, or Claire, you seem to have this, extensive knowledge of it. But for people that haven't got any diagnosis, they don't know what they may or may not have. Where do people start with it?
That's an excellent question. And one thing I wanted to say is I listened recently to the Scroobius Pip podcast, and he had Blind Boy on. Blind Boy has got, he's just recently being diagnosed as autism. And he talks a lot about neurodiversity. And Scroobius Pip has got a stammer. And he does this podcast and he stammers a lot. And that's also been called recently neurodivergence. So it kind of falls under that kind of umbrella term of neurodivergence, ADHD, with autism, having a stammer, dyspraxia, which is body coordination issues, dyslexia, ADHD, and Tourette syndrome. However, with above neurodiversity, if you like, or alongside it, you have mental health conditions that can be neurotic, which means milder mental health conditions, and psychotic, which are more problematic, such as schizophrenia, personality disorders, detachment from reality. But a lot of neuroses go with these neurodivergences, and we're still in the early stages of truly understanding how all these things link together, but there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and autism. There's a lot of overlap between ADHD and things like OCD. So often obsessive compulsive disorder, someone might be diagnosed with that, but they may well have ADHD that goes along with that, or is in fact stronger, and vice versa. So it's quite a complicated maze. Often children get diagnosed at school if they've got parents who are in the know or the school spots it. But you get a lot of girls who slip through the system, particularly when they're young, and there's a lot of adults being diagnosed with ADHD today. Some studies have even indicated that 40% of the population might be neurodivergent to some extent, but it's very hard to pin that down because people are so different and present differently, etc. But there is a lot of overlap between OCD and ADHD and other neurotic conditions as well. So that's an excellent question. And sometimes the OCD can be a coping mechanism for the ADHD brain, because I remember getting very anxious about whether my room was clean as a youngster. And I don't know whether that was my neurodivergent brain trying to cope, or whether it was OCD and neurodivergence came later. I just don't know. But it's an excellent question, and I think it just goes to the very essence of what it means to be human and how complicated we are. So, great question, Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on that as well, because I have actually been also exploring OCD, because I do also fit a lot of that criteria, and actually the meds that I'm on are supposed to impact on OCD as well, or OCD sort of behaviors. But I guess so. Yeah, I think Tim, you have a lot of sort of understanding around those sort of connections with it. But I much prefer that. Like, I know we talked about this, Tim, before, didn't we, about the idea of neurodivergent? Because I just think it's that I just sort of see it as our brains just a slightly operate in a slightly different way. So some things so for example, dyslexia, and I don't know whether you think this also a bit, Tim, with sort of ADHD, it's all very sort of similar. So I remember dyslexia being explained, my dyslexia being explained to me as kind of like, if you're doing a graph, you'll kind of like I don't know why I'm doing this because you're not going to see it, but you kind of, in all the sort of different areas that you'd be tested on, which would be things like spatial awareness, spelling, all sorts of sort of what you would call intelligence, and then but your graph for sort of neurodivergent people is like a load of pointy mountains. Do you know what I mean? But when you're not neurodivergent, everybody's better at some things than other, but it's pretty kind of like steady line. Do you know what I mean? You'll have like little bumps, like better at that, less at that, but it's very kind of apparent in neurodivergent because you there's things that you might be really good at, but then really simple things that you just can't do that doesn't match your intelligence. There's a mismatch. So, and I think that, I don't know, I think that's the kind of like a way, you know, one way of describing sort of what neurodivergence is. So it's just, it's a mismatch of your sort of abilities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I wanted to say as well is that if you think about the education system, the health system, the employment system, employment and training, the amount of potential wasted by not understanding these things, like ADHD, people in prison, there's a very high incidence of ADHD, their addiction, not in education, employment or training. And it's not an excuse, it's just a reason why people with ADHD are represented more in those kinds of things like prison, etc. Because everyone's got strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes neurodivergence, they can have some quite good strengths, but then they really struggle because of those troughs that you alluded to. And we need to appreciate that and allow that creativity. I mean, a lot of ADHD people are creative. We need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of people and be open and say, right, that person can't do that or that very well, and that's okay because they can do these other things. And we need to appreciate that rather than critiquing them for it. And I do think it needs to be a wider social change. And we can't write people off because they've got these weaknesses when they've also got good strengths. And maybe the strengths aren't that high, but it's such a waste of potential, I think, to let people go through education systems and be written off. And yes, some people are high functioning, as you've just mentioned, but others aren't. And it has a big impact on outcomes, and it can have a big impact on the way society is. I mean, we already know about, like, you know, productivity in this country is quite low, etc. How much untapped potential out there is there that is not being tapped into? One of the things I want to talk about is the comedy circuit and talking about mental health, because I know, Claire, you said you got a real dopamine hit from the comedy circuit. Femme de la femme, when you did it, yeah, this is great. And I kind of recognised that in myself. I like those little victories, they make me feel great. But then the hard things in between, which means, like, I don't know, writing a document. Like, I'm a decent writer, but like getting a document right, it bores the crap out of me and etc. And sometimes I really struggle with that side of things. And comedy, I think, is a good outlet for people who are creative and who have got ADHD. And you do get those dopamine hits. And I think I shared with you some studies about this, saying that there's a higher incidence of mental health issues on the comedy circuit. And there was a podcast, the Adult ADHD UK podcast mentioned it as well. And what are your experiences, Claire, with comedy? Do you find it's a good way of giving you those dopamine hits? Is that something that you think has led you down that path?
Oh, definitely. I think I've always been somebody that needs those kind of big highs. Do you know what I mean? And I always find it really interesting, like, so many people sort of, I get this thing, and sometimes it kind of like annoys me. Like, people say, "You're so brave," and it's kind of, but it's you know, like, I think I've sort of said before, like, you know, I'm so sort of anxious and frightened about so many little things all the time, and all, you know, like the idea of like sorting my passport out or just shit like that, that actually it's kind of a relief to go and do something that's genuinely scary. So, you know, like, I'd rather, you know, I'd rather jump out of do a parachute jump than fill in my passport form. And and I think comedy does attract a lot of people. You know, I think there's a lot of comedy that I've sort of seen that, you know, touches on mental health and, like, you know, not just ADHD, but interestingly, like when I did the gig on Thursday, that came up with a couple of the comics that had been diagnosed with ADHD. But there's a lot of, you know, it's quite a sort of, it's like an extreme sport. I don't know whether Matt would agree with that. It's a bit like an extreme sport.
I'd just say, Claire, I mean, I say things out as they are, and whatever you call ADHD, neurodiversity, I don't even really understand neurodiversity, but I call us odd pods. you know,
Yeah.
uh, what's wrong with saying a bunch of odd pods, weirdos getting together and all accepting whatever you've got, whatever gender you are. It doesn't matter, and they're not caring about, oh, this person's this person's that. On the comedy scene, no one cares, and it's therapy for the individual. And people go on the comedy circuit, they talk about their personal experiences. What makes things funny is when people are being honest about comedy, about their anything personal that's been a massive hurdle to overcome, and people relate to it in the audience, and they say, "Oh my God, is that a real thing? Does that happen to normal
Mm.
people? I've been hiding that away for that many years. That people have anxiety, stresses, they have all the little problems in life." And I think what comedy does, and comedians especially, we take that small analysis of a problem, expand it up, and it'd be a little tiny little thing, and we'll explore it that deeply that we make it funny, and we'll concentrate on it that hard. It can be your routine in the morning, just having a shower, and how much it'll annoy you, just getting up, banging your toe, you think you're going to start having a bad day. You know, yeah, going into the fridge and the fridge light goes off, and then you worry all day about where you buy a fridge light from, and it, but it's true that that's what comedy is. It's really narrowing down. It's therapy, isn't it? And it's analysis. But I don't. Uh, I've never associated. Or I always think, with all the names that you mentioned about ADHD, neurodiversity, OCD, all the terminology that's used, and I think it's beneficial from the medical industry's perspective, because they'll be able to put things into boxes, in effect, won't they? They'll be able to say, this is this links into this, and potentially you can medicate this. But I mean, you were mentioning before, 40% of the population potentially have issues. So it just seems like it's possibly something that's in most people's brains, and I don't know whether it's something that develops over time, whether it's already instilled into someone when they're born, or whether it's someone's environment and an upbringing that can create anxieties, because something might have caused you stress when you were younger, and then as an adult you've never dealt with it, so it comes back to haunt you in different ways. Um, I know. Just tell me if I'm waffling, but I know you mentioned prison before, and a lot of people in prison have certain issues, and the behaviours may be based on what they've experienced. But a lot of people in prison are from, backgrounds where they haven't been given any opportunities in life, and the mental health problems might be because they haven't been given the opportunity to develop, and then as an adult you don't quite know how to deal with being an adult, because you haven't been given the opportunity to grow in the same way as other people, so you see yourself as different. But I would just on the comedy point, one thing, and Claire will know, we self-deprecate for a reason, and if you've got something physically wrong with you, like for me, I always go on about my double chins, my big earlobes, and you pick things out physically about yourself, and once you've said it out loud, someone will go, "Oh, that comedian with the big earlobes," and then having big earlobes becomes like a cool thing, and someone else will look at their own earlobes and go, "Oh, wow, I've got them," and look, that guy who's on stage has got them. Now it's normal. I'm going to be proud of my big earlobes and walk around and tell everyone I've got big earlobes like some comedian. Or if someone's got anything that what you'd class as wrong with someone, it's not wrong. It's just what that person's got. They own it. And all of a sudden it normalizes it, and it becomes acceptable. And it's easy to pick out physical things about yourself, but comedians do it with mental health problems as well, and they'll talk deeply about their own mental health problems, and they'll create jokes about it. And when people are listening, they go, "Oh wow, has other people experienced that? I feel that as well." And they can laugh about their own situation, and that's what comedy is. It's laughing about being human and about all the all the weird things that go on in life, and that's why comedy's therapy, isn't it, Claire? Yeah.
I totally. Can I just come back on a couple of things? Yeah, because like I've had this thing where I say like comedy can be like alchemy. It's like alchemizing something that you might feel uncomfortable with, or like you say, like it might be a physical, your flaws, and then turning it into something like funny. But then it's also like then it connects with other people, and you're like, oh yeah, it's okay. And that's the really kind of like amazing, powerful element of it. I think that how that kind of works. And it's like, it's that whole thing that comedy is a conversation, isn't it? And like, when it helps you to laugh at exactly all that silly stuff that's being human, or mistakes you've made, or and but also just in terms of like, just very briefly on the kind of like labeling and things like that. I think labels can be helpful when you're trying to make sense of things. Do you know what I mean? Like when you just like, you don't understand why you've not, like, say for me, and I think, perhaps Tim and, a lot of people, like, I just couldn't respond in the education system. And I was sort of labelled as a bit thick and a bit stupid, and I didn't come out of any like GCSEs or anything. But then there's that, as I've sort of got older, I've sort of realized, well, I'm not stupid. I'm quite intelligent. I'm quite capable in lots of other areas. And I don't understand, you know what I mean? So sometimes those labels are just like, they give you your own sort of context. But there's another element where some of it just needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, that we're all a bit odd, and like you say, and
I think the comedy circuit, though, I think that I can see why people maybe with self-esteem issues, mental health issues, people who need dopamine hits with ADHD get attracted to that being on the stage. But at the same time, I've done a couple of like comparing things for like events in the school and stuff. And standing in front of a tough audience, I would think, whoa, if that went bad, I don't know how I'd deal with that. And as well as talking about mental health and the comedy circuit, what are the good and the bad aspects to it? How do you deal with a tough audience? If you had tough audiences, how do you kind of get beyond that? Because for me, if I had a tough audience one night, I'd be thinking, whoa, that was a real punch in the stomach. Have you got any comments on that?
I know Matt's probably got lots to say on this as well, but I've sort of like, I think comedy is quite a double-edged sword, in that it can be incredibly sort of empowering and such a buzz, and like, all the lovely things that we've just been talking about, how you sort of you're able to sort of laugh at yourself and connect. But when it isn't going well, and this is, I'm not saying this is everybody, but for my experience, and you start to sort of doubt yourself, or it's not going like in the way, like you have a few bad gigs, or you're struggling to get gigs, it can also really inflame all of that kind of horrible anxiety and insecurity. So it can be quite a double-edged sword. And I had to sort of back off from gigging for a little bit, because it was just kind of like my head was getting really sort of paranoid. I was getting very, very, it was, and you feel really exposed. So I think it's one of these things, it's really important to sort of, acknowledge that side of it, because there's other times you're more resilient to dodgy gigs. Do you know what I mean? And you're just like, fuck it. Do you know what I mean? But I think it's something that people with mental health problems, you have to be quite careful to step back when you need to, and sort of hide away a little bit, because it is so exposing. So those are my thoughts, but yeah, go for it, Matt, as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, Tim, that you say about like tough gigs, because you do get tough gigs, but it's the reason why that gig is tough. And very similar way to, if you're being taught in school and you're in a horrible classroom. There's external noise. There's nothing of interest on the walls. You say you're just in a white room. There's someone with a bit of a monotone voice drawing things on a whiteboard. It's not the classroom. It's not the pupils that are bad pupils. It's the environment of the night that makes it just makes a poor night. So you could have two rooms with 50 people, and you'll go, oh, look, we just got 50 really, bad audience members in there. But like in Shennanigans, it's a really fun environment. There's lots going on. It's not that we always get a good audience. It's because the environment's right, the seating's right, everyone's listening, everyone's engaged. And some rooms, people are too far spread out. People are being invited to talk amongst themselves. They're not. It's like a classroom. The MC has to tell the audience exactly what they want from them. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. I want you to make noise. I want you to participate while I'm on. Do this, and people like to be told what to do. But when you get disparity on a night, whether it's the MC, the way the room's set out, just a really dull environment, you as a comedian, you go on and you go, well, what went wrong there? And it's probably not you. It's not the audience. It's a collaboration of all the environmental factors around you that have created a poor night. And some nights succeed, some nights don't. And you see that it transpires to life, doesn't it? If you're in a really poorly lit office and everyone's a bit down in the dumps because of the environment, you're not going to have a productive workforce. And it's the same with comedy nights.
No, that makes perfect sense. And, as a teacher and someone who's been taught, I kind of get exactly what you're saying. As an adult, sometimes you go into a bar or a club or a room and you just go, bad vibe, not into this, or oh yeah, that was all right in there, wasn't it? And you can't really put your finger on it, but it's like an emergent quality to the night, and the MC and the fact that people are going to see comedy, that all makes it interesting. I mean, hecklers in the audience can be difficult. Sometimes you might have a bad audience who aren't really into it or whatever for a whole host of reasons, but I've seen some of the best comedians like deal with a heckler at a big gig, or a gig which wasn't necessarily just a comedy gig, but they'd gone up for a bit to talk about other things, And I remember, I forget which comedian it was, someone shouted something out quite offensive to him, and he just went and come back with this for the post. And it was just brilliant, because obviously comedians have got scripts, but you've got to go with the flow to an extent. And I suppose you get better at that. Is that what you do? You kind of, the most time you spend up on the stage, the better you are at gauging things and responding to things.
Well, I was going to say, I remember watching Matt at this gig at the First Amendment. I remember watching you. There's a couple of others on that night, and it's interesting, this sort of thing that I'd been very much sticking with my script and quite scared of like audience sort of, I don't know, of sort of going off script. And that one of the things that I'd sort of observed in certain comics was what I was sort of like, that's where I want to try, and that's the bit I want to sort of get better at, is being more like going with the flow and kind of not being so sort of like strict with your material. So just allowing, if like the material's not landing, you make a joke about it not landing. And I thought, oh yeah, like that's, that's where I want to get better at. And but I remember watching Matt and thinking, yeah, that's what, because I think you're very relaxed about just going with wherever it's going. And I thought it was quite interesting that you'd come from an improv background, whereas I've actually come from a theatre background, so it's kind of script. But I think it takes a lot of confidence, and it's like doing Femme de la Femme is really good for me, because bit by bit I'm trying to like just chat with the crowd and just see where it goes, you know what I mean? And it's just, each time trying to be a bit braver with that. And I might have gone right off on a tangent now, so I'm not sure.
No, you haven't. I think from the outside looking in, that's what we think of comedians, that they have a script, but they get heckled. And how did he deal with that? And how did he deal with that? As you said, it's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? And it's about knowing how to navigate things and get through a difficult night. Matt said before about his first gig, he thought it was going terrible, and someone said, "Oh, that was good. Let's do something about it as well." You know what I mean? And it just really, really interests me from the outside. Now, I've got this romantic idea that you go around doing gigs around Liverpool, getting like 200 quid a night and getting about a grand a week, in and about a grand a week, that you don't need other jobs, etc. What's the reality of the comedy circuit for yourselves as people who might not necessarily have a show on BBC One?
Well,
So,
I don't know how
I mean,
you're doing, Matt, but I generally don't get paid.
yeah, I mean, it depends on the night and what you get invited to, and we do a lot of open mics, and then when you do get paid, I mean, this sounds like self-indulgent, but I'm headlining on Wednesday in Sheffield at Hagler's Corner, and that will probably pay. You don't know what you're getting paid until the guy just physically hands you an envelope with some money in it, and it could have 20 quid in it. It could have £50, 60, 70. If you're headlining and you're a well-known act, you'll get 150 to 300 at your bigger, comedy clubs like Hot Water, and people double up on nights. So it's all different levels of where you're at. I mean, I'm going down to Sheffield on Wednesday, and I'm staying in a hotel and paying for the train down there. So, I'll be out of pocket, but, I'm in effect paying to go and entertain people, but I'll get a buzz from it. I'll be on a really cool poster, Matt Jones headlining, and other people will see that, say, "Oh, I get feedback from the promoter. Was he any good? No, you'll never get booked again, or you'll get more gigs off the back of it." And it is just you get gigs from doing gigs, and you get better gigs from doing other gigs, and like what Claire set up with Femme de la Femme. I mean, when I first met Claire, we were having a proper laugh and we were messaging each other, bonded over like
Shennanigan.
yeah, shenanigans. And Claire messaged me, one of her first messages. She came to one of my open mic nights and said it was one of the most fun times she's had, doing a little open mic. And she just said it was relaxed, had a laugh with it. And, that made me feel good that I was putting on a night that people felt comfortable at. And I think you've taken that to the next level, that making acts feel comfortable, haven't you, Claire?
Yeah, well, yeah, because I think like I remember that Shenanigans, and I thought it was such a lovely atmosphere, and I think you had you had such a big part in kind of making it fun and non-competitive, and like, and there's some gigs out there you just feel like completely like, the headliners don't want to talk to you, you don't, they've got their own little camera and they don't want to, like, they just want to film themselves, and it can be really kind of, and I think I think it's definitely about being the change you want to see. Do you know what I mean? And that, like with Femme de la Femme, I want it to feel really comfortable. I want people to be paid. I want people to have like a video that they can take with them that's quality, that they can get better gigs, and that they're paid on time. You know what I mean? Just all those things that you kind of, and where people feel just really supported, and it's a team effort. And so yeah, I just think, that's the sort of gigs that everybody's winning, because if your acts are more chilled, then they do a better job, you know what I mean? And you get a better response, and it's just like an upward circle of good.
It
And
sounds like.
all
Go on, Matt.
I was only going to say all the comedians know each other in the Northwest. Claire will know everyone. I'll know everyone. And when we meet each other, it's like your paths cross probably every month or two, and then it's like seeing an old friend, that you haven't seen for a while, and you'll do that gig. I always like to stay to the end, have a couple of pints, and it's a social thing. You're meeting people that you've got this common interest, and there are comedians out there that are literally in it to progress as quickly as possible. And when I see comedians that don't really engage with the other comics. They just do their thing, think they're better than everyone else, and then just leave. I
Yeah.
always just think to myself, well, that's what's driving you, but I certainly wouldn't want you on one of my own gigs because I want people that are fun, have an energy about them. They want to socialize. It's not all about just getting the best comics on. It's about getting the people on that you like being around and the ones that sort of buy into the whole. This is a comedy circuit, and it's a group of people getting together to try and entertain others for very little money. You know, we're doing it for all different reasons, but I do it for the social side of it.
The passion you both got for comedy and for this might sound a bit academic, but what Aristotle wrote about pursuing the good life, you know, the passion you two have got for comedy and the reasons that you're in it, I think are just good intention. It's good stuff. It's getting people together. It's about making the world a better place. And you know, one of the reasons I've been podcasting for a year now, we talk about money. If anyone can contribute financially to make my podcast work at coffee.com, please go to the podcast notes and contribute for the price of a cup of coffee once a month. But I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because I read a psychology book or did a course a couple of years ago, and it said, look at yourself in the mirror. How old are you? How would you feel if you kept doing what you're doing now? And I went, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I did what I'm doing now for the next 20, 30 years. I need to do something that really matters to me. And for me, like podcasting, being creative, that really matters to me. And it sounds like you two have gotten a real passion for those kinds of things as well. And what we've spoken about comedy, the circuit, the difficulties, the mental health, ADHD crossover. We've talked about ADHD. We've talked about the importance of people and, memories and times from the past, Matt, when we were at uni, etc. And I just want to kind of draw a line under what we said so far, because Matt's going to tell us a little bit about a friend of his who sadly passed recently, and about how comedy is something that's there in the background. It's not the be all and end all, but it can help us to deal with some difficult times. So, Matt, do you want to talk about your friend?
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously very recent and raw, so I'll keep it brief. But one of my really close friends, 25-year friend, who was married to one of my older friends, who I knew for 35 years, recently passed away. She'd been looked after in Marie Curie, and she had stage 4 bowel cancer, and she was a head teacher, been in all the papers, and you wonder yourself in your own head, what what's going on in my head at the moment, and the emotion that you get. And I know Claire was talking about, medications that you take, but I I very rarely get emotional about anything. When someone dies, and it was the worst bit for me was before she actually died. A couple of days before, I went home and I was having like pains in my chest, and it was like uncontrollable emotion. You don't know what it is, you don't know how to deal with it. And then I just picked up the phone to one of my friends, and I couldn't speak on the phone, but eventually I got talking, and sort of that pain, and I'm talking physical pain, sort of disappears a little bit, and then it goes into a, a more comfortable emotion where I know what crying feels like. I know what hurt feels like if you've got adrenaline pumping around your body, and you've got that hurt. But sometimes you get to a stage in emotion, and I've only recently experienced it, where you suddenly say to yourself, right, I don't know what that feeling is, and how do I cope with that? And apart from phoning one of your friends, there's no one to go to, because you need help in that sort of 10-20 minutes of pain, rather than going to the doctors and telling them about what happened, because you're like, well, it's past now. I don't really need any help, but it's completely unexplained as to why I felt like I was having a heart attack. I think with men especially, we don't cry, we don't get emotional. When something weird happens to us that we don't know, you just sort of put it down to, oh, well, I'll just let it be misunderstood, and I'll never get to the bottom of what it is, or will it happen again. So there's probably lots of people like that just, you, Tim and Claire, you know, delve into it, try and get medicated for it. But I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that just ignore these things, and it builds up, doesn't it, and becomes an even bigger problem.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing to take from that is the tragedy of loss of people close to us. I mean, I've lost people close to me, etc. And I always have this feeling, and I can't explain it, that they're at peace and everything's kind of okay. That's what happens, and everything's okay. You know what I mean? I can't really explain that, but I think processing emotions and talking about them and sharing conversations with people, particularly for men, I think that is more of an issue to generalize. To talk about your emotions and to process them and not to suppress them, because when we try to bury them, we often then use things to bury them, and that just makes it 10 times worse. And I think it's important to process emotion, to go through those stages of grief, and to talk about it and be okay with it, because that's ultimately, you know, what life's about. And I think comedies are just a great outlet, and I think just being with other people and talking, and I mean, think about that feeling that we sometimes get, and you two will have. I can't remember the last time I had it like this, where you're laughing so much that you're like, your stomach hurts, and you're like, you know what I mean? You're laughing so much that you want it to stop and your jaws hurt, and it's a beautiful, beautiful feeling when you're just kind of letting that raw emotion of just sheer joy and happiness come out. And I think one of the great things about comedy that you two have mentioned today is the ability to look at those little things, to look at grief, to look at loss, to look at the shower, the light in the fridge. And I thought that was just me, Matt. You open the fridge. Is the fridge working? I mean, we go out of the fridge in the morning, like, doesn't come on, right? Is it still on? Do we need to make an emergency, you know, move to another fridge or whatever? That kind of scenario is that life is tough and life can be very difficult. But by being with other people, by pursuing what you love, by being honest and talking to people, you know, we can get through it and we can get better, can't we?
And I do a joke on death as well. I mean, my nan died about 20 years ago, and I do a joke about her death only on the basis that it reminds me of my nan, and it's a tragic circumstance. And if you've got 2 minutes, I'll tell you it. Just do you want to hear it?
Yeah, go on.
Go for it.
Yeah, so basically, it's a true story. This, so my nan was having an operation, cataracts operation, in the Liverpool Royal Hospital. Me and my mum went to meet her outside, and she released herself. She was meant to get helped down by the people in the hospital, and she went through the revolving door, and she got hit by the revolving door, and that's what killed her. Me and my mum were out. There's true this, and me and my mum were outside. And I saw her get hit by the revolving door, so I bolted to go and see what was going on. And a couple of doctors and nurses ran over to her aid, and I stood back, watched what was going on. We thought they were going to be able to bring her round, which they did for a minute. And then she went again, and then she went round again, and round again, and round again. And that's the joke, by the way. So about the revolving door, about bringing her around. So it's,
I didn't want to laugh because I didn't want to laugh because you were telling me the
truth. Oh God!
I thought, yeah, did he mean to say that? I had to check myself. But that's what I'm talking about, is you know, that's the kind of thing that, like, everyone, I've seen people who are grieving, and I always say to them, it's always easy when it's someone else who's lost someone to say, listen, they wouldn't want you to be like this. They want you to be like, you know, remembering them more positively, etc., as much as we have to grieve. But, you know, I just think comedy, I mean, I just wonder, like, who the first people were who started doing jokes and comedy, you know, like, think of early humans. Was there a natural comic in the, like, your little group of hunter-gatherers who like stood up and did a little show by the fire and say, "Oh man, where's all the food, man? Are we going to get food next Christmas or whatever?" But you know, all joking aside, I think comedy is such an important part of life, and you see it sometimes at funerals where people crack jokes when they're telling a story, and you know, later on after the funeral, people are laughing and joking, and I suppose that's all part of the grieving process. But to Matt's point, we need to process our emotions and not suppress them.
And
comedy is a great way.
It breaks that cycle of sadness sometimes, because sadness is just an emotion in the same way happiness is. Like when my dad passed away, when someone actually passes, that's not the worst bit. Sometimes it's the build up to how they die and the illness. And I remember someone saying to me at my dad's funeral, "Oh, my dad and your dad," and we were in a little group, they went, "My dad and your dad will be up there now having a whiskey." And my comedic brain kicked in, and I thought, well, I'll lighten the mood here. And I turned around to this lad and said, "Well, I don't know why they'd be up there having a whiskey together, because my dad didn't know your dad." And it breaks, you know, that it just breaks that awkwardness where people are going, "All right, we should be in a sad mood at the moment." But there's nothing wrong with suddenly flipping into a happy mode. You know, you can laugh at a funeral. We were looking at photos of our friend, and you'll suddenly see a photo and you'll get a happy emotion. And there's nothing wrong with flicking from being sad to being happy.
That's it. And just very quickly, apparently John F. Kennedy, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were on the edge of a nuclear war, apparently, like he said he cracked a joke apparently in the midst of it, like to like a little aside, like, you know, tomorrow I could be the guy who ends the human race, and started laughing. You know, as a little joke, and it's almost a way of processing it and going, let's just take a step back. And one of the best things I've seen about having a laugh like that is Russell Brand saying once that, like, have you ever had an argument with someone about something, or like someone close to you, you're having an argument, and one of you starts laughing their heads off and the other one starts laughing their heads off, and you've been at each other's throats minutes before, and it's such a release, and then it's almost like all the antagonism and the ill feelings just forgotten. And I think that's the beauty of laughter. It galvanizes people, and it gives us a commonality of touch that everything's ultimately going to be okay. Do you know what I
mean? It's a tension release, isn't it? It releases
tension. It's those moments where you're not meant to laugh. And I always remember being in school, and you go into church, and we'd have you know, the books that you read from with all the hymns in. Someone will like throw one of them, and you know the teachers have clocked it, and no one wants to laugh, and everyone's looking at each other. And they know if they laugh, they're going to get thrown out of the church. And it's that tension build up, and everyone's going, "Oh my God, this is so funny," but I'm not allowed to laugh. And then one person will make a little noise and go, and it sets everyone off. You know,
that's brilliant, isn't it? But I'm just going to draw to a conclusion now, because we've been at it for well over an hour. But I think that's a nice way to finish that. I think the joy of laughter, because you certainly, sometimes you go days without laughing, don't you? And you think, oh my God. Like apparently in China, when you go to the doctor in China, they sometimes say to the doctors sometimes say to people, like, when was the last time you laughed? Which isn't a Western thing that we do in the West, but there's a truth to that, isn't there? Which I think is just universal. But anyway, I'll draw this to a conclusion now. So Matt Jones, star of So Yous Do Comedy and the open mic, what's it called? I want to give it its proper name.
Up at the Crack.
Up at the Crack.
Up at the Crack, yeah.
Up for the Crack, sorry. That's a Scouse thing as well. Thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts on the comedy scene, reminiscing about uni, talking about your friend and the importance of laughter, and also your observations about some of the difficulties of the comedy scene. And Claire, thank you very much for telling us about Femme de la Femme, talking about the comedy scene, mental health, where you're up to with ADHD, medication. And I honestly feel like we could talk for probably a few more hours, and maybe I think in the future we should talk again and
Definitely.
have another like laugh. But I know that me meeting's only got 2 minutes left because I'm such a cheapskate. So we'll draw things to a conclusion here. Claire or Matt, is there anything else you want to say? All details for your shows will be in the notes, but is there anything you want to say before we finish? You don't have to say it.
No.
Uncomfortable silence.
No, just cheers, Tim, for having us on, and hope whoever listens to this has a little bit of a laugh.
Yeah, thanks both of you. It's been good.
I was going to repeat the joke Matt told me in '98, but I don't think it'd get past the censors. But it was one of the funniest jokes. Do you remember what joke it was?
No.
The one about the sign language and the parents, the deaf parents. Do you remember it? I've probably just gone politically incorrect there describing the joke, so I might edit that out. But it was a really funny joke. Right, you two, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Claire, it'd be great to have you on again to talk about other issues that are close to your heart. And Matt, it'd be great to have you on again, same, more comedy. And also, maybe we should talk about uni life, because I tried to write a book about university because it was so amazing. And I know that you had a similar experience, but I don't know. I still remember them as the halcyon days. Right, listen, folks, I'm going to stop recording and the meeting will end in less than a minute anyway. But thank you so much for your time and giving up your great time, your precious